Hey everyone, Joellen here, and welcome to another session of Washed in Watercolor. I'm kicking off the new year with this beautiful sunset. In many ways, the subject matter is simple. There's just a boat, a sun, and some clouds, not a lot of drawing. However, washes, whether working wet into wet or dry into wet, can be very tricky. In this video, I demonstrate how to master washes to get a beautiful glowing sunset. Here I have a basic drawing of a boat, level horizon, and the sun. Notice that the sun is blue. That is because I used PBO masking fluid to retain the white paper. The colors I'll be using for this tutorial include Winsor Lemon, Winsor Orange Red Shade, Winsor Red, Quinacridone Magenta, Ultramarine Blue, and Neutral Tint. Favorite go-to brushes are a Princeton Script, a Princeton Quill on the far right, and in the middle, two Rosemary pointed rounds. I start by wetting the paper with clean water. Next, I mix some Winsor Orange Red Shade along with some magenta. I carefully paint the wet surface. Notice how the edges remain nice and soft. This is because the paper is wet. Next, I'll grab some magenta and mix it in with my ultramarine blue and neutral tint. I add a touch of orange too. Then I'll continue to paint the sky and the water. With a bit more ultramarine blue and neutral tint, I'll paint above the horizon and then down into the darker areas of the water. Notice how my paper is still wet and everything is just nicely blending. If I want to pull up some lighter areas, I will take a damp brush that's clean, wipe it on my paper towel, and just wipe through areas of my painting to lift the paint. Now, as the paper starts to dry up, all of this becomes a little trickier. At this point, I'm going to take some of my orange along with some of my magenta, and I'll wipe that on a paper towel so it's drier paint. And I will now paint this into my wet wash. Hopefully, I'll avoid getting a blossom. At this point, I'll add a little bit of my Quinacridone Magenta to my neutral tint and ultramarine blue, and again, paint the horizon. I really like to push the method of working wet into wet and dry into wet to the extreme, but I think that at this point I am going to dry my painting. Okay, so this is crazy. You can see how much lighter my painting is after drying it, and that's one of the things about watercolor. It does dry a lot lighter. I'm going to add another layer of color. So at this point, I'm going to re-wet my paper with my large brush. If you are painting along, you just want to be sure that your painting is 100% dry before re-wetting it. Mixing together some Winsor Orange along with some magenta and ultramarine blue, I'll again paint the sky. Next, I'll pick up some neutral tint along with some ultramarine blue, maybe a little bit of my quinacridone, and you can see how I wipe off my brush on a paper towel, and this way I'm working drier paint into a wet area, and hopefully what will happen is I'll avoid getting a blossom and I'll retain a nice soft shape or line. I just love working wet into wet washes. To me, it's what watercolor is all about. It just looks so beautiful. I'm really happy with how this looks, and at this point I'll dry my painting again. My painting is totally dry to the touch, and at this point, instead of wetting it with a brush, I'm going to re-wet it by misting it with a spray bottle. Unfortunately, I think my spray bottle was on holiday, so it didn't quite mist how I had planned. So I'm just going to absorb some of it with a paper towel and just push on. Just mixing up another batch of that dark paint, including my neutral tint, ultramarine blue, and magenta. I'll now paint the clouds that are overhead. By getting these just a little bit darker, that will help to really push the horizon back in space. I add touches of color here and there just for some excitement. At this point, I mix up some darker paint again, and this time I'm thinking about the reflection in the water. And reflections are not cast shadows, and some people confuse them sometimes. They are a reflection, a mirror image, and it will be vertically exactly underneath the object. It won't move to the right or left. So I'm thinking about the main mast and the sail as I'm putting this in. Now my paper has started to dry up, unfortunately, so now I'm coming in with paint, but I'm having to manually go and soften the edges by using a clean, damp brush. One of the funny things about watercolor or working wet into wet is that you have to have your eyes all over the place. So as I'm focusing down the bottom at the reflection, all of a sudden my cloud shapes are changing and fading, and I really liked them before, but they did kind of move on their own while I wasn't paying attention. So at this point I'll darken things and see what I can do, just kind of bringing them back to where they were. Okay, so that looks better. So now I'll just dry my painting so I can move on to the boat. I'll use the same combination of quinacridone magenta with some ultramarine blue and neutral tint, and I want to make sure my paper is entirely dry before painting this. And I'll start with the top part of the sail and just work my way down. It's important when I'm painting something that looks like a solid color, just to add touches of other colors. It really gives the object life. I'm pretty happy with how the boat came out, and I put a little boat way off to the left-hand side, and now I want to remove my masking from the sun using some Windsor Lemon along with some touches of my orange combination. I'll paint in the sun. I want to give my horizon line a little bit more definition, so I'm going to use a ruler, and I want to make sure this is level, and I'm going to water down my dark paint because I don't want this to be as dark as my boat. And here we go. So I feel like that gives better definition to that area, and at this point I'm going to sign my painting. I hope you enjoyed watching this, and please remember to like, subscribe, and comment too. See you next time.